Chapter 302 is Horikoshi's best example of how emotions really plays an impact into the world of My Hero Academia. Obviously, everything is emotional. Deku is a very emotional character. Bakugo is a very emotional character. But looking back at Toya's upbringing and the Todoroki family as a whole, their dynamic and relationship with their emotions are not healthy by any means. And they're coming to that realization, but also, even down to a Quirk level, it is something that plays such an integral part of their family and their family's history that it can no longer be denied, and we're finally getting some inclusion with all of that. My name is Andrew Nisger, and today I'm going to be breaking down everything that happened in chapter 302 of My Hero Academia, correctly titled How to Put Out Not to Put Out a Fire Part 2. It is the summary of everything that has happened with Toya, how we got to the point of where he is now Dabi, continuing on with the story where last week in chapter 301 we saw it end with Toya going after baby Shoto when realizing that his father is pushing him off the side, with Toya developing the powers that Endeavor's been looking for so long, while at the same time ignoring everything that Toya is doing and how strong he is becoming. And we see what happens when a child so determined to be a hero is pushed off to the side and is so tied to his emotions, just wanting to be recognized. It starts off with seeing that after Shoto was attacked, Endeavor pulls Shoto away from the kids and pretty much isolates him from them for the rest of his upbringing. And we see a very similar scene eventually where 5 years later we see Fuyumi and Natsu asking Toya to play with them outside, and we see Shoto looking down on them, wanting to go play with them. Obviously a scene we saw so long ago, but with Endeavor just pulling him away, and Shoto begging and begging just to go and play with them once, when Endeavor saying, no, you have more endurance training to do. Later on that night, when Natsu and Toya are talking, Toya is saying, like, I admit it, I was wrong to attack Shoto. Shoto did nothing wrong, and just kind of going on and sharing a lot of his feelings with Natsu, when Natsu says, why don't you go and bother his sister with you for once? And that kind of set Toya off on a whole rampant about, are you going to ignore me to the women in this family don't understand, because we see very much that Rei is someone that bodies up her emotions very well. And from what we've seen with Fuyumi, she does a very similar thing, is that she definitely has emotions and feelings about everything, but we don't see them come to the forefront as much from the little bit of time we've had with her character. And this sent Toya to a path that he just wants someone to pay attention to him, to care about him. And this is something that probably haunts Natsu in a way, that this is one of the last heart-to-heart conversations they probably had together. I mean, I know there are some time jumps here and there, but it's something that Natsu probably sees as a turning point for Toya, where Toya felt like another connection in his family might have been cut off there. And at this point, he actually starts growing more and more resentful of his parents and blaming Rei almost for having kids in the first place, as Endeavor just sees Fuyumi, Natsu, and Toya now as failed creations and only focus on Shoto. And the feelings towards his mother just grow and grow and grow. And we actually get a couple of points where Toya lashes out at his mother, just screaming at her, saying that she wouldn't understand, that the women in this family don't understand, and just showing that Toya has really cut off connections to everyone in his family that cares about him, or at one point cared about him, and that he's starting to spiral out of control and letting his emotions take control of him, which really ends up being in his favor in a way. So one day we see Rei catching Toya going up to the mountain again, and she says, why don't you go play with the classmates, and do you really want to be a hero that bad? And that's where we see another one of those hatchbacks. And just going back and forth, this is really another moment where she was talking about how her family was poor, and that's why they sold her off to Enji, and so she was just as guilty of being born as Enji was. During the winter season, though, Toya had always been smaller. Even though he was a couple years older than Natsu, he was always shorter than them, and once he hit puberty, he really started growing, and at the same point, he got to really learn so much more about his quirk. And we actually find out that Dabi's fire quirk, well, yes, it is already known to be stronger than Endeavor's fire quirk, and that in the Doctor, we learned from last chapter, that has more of the ice resistance as Rei, which is why he was pushed off the side. Ultimately, it's actually tied to his emotions. So the more emotional he is, the more he taps into his emotions, the stronger his flames do. And this is actually when we see them move from red to blue And he's talking about when he gets excited, he can't stop but cry, showing how much of his emotions and how emotional he is may have been built into something in his body and his quirk, and it's actually the perfect combination almost of his parents. We see Endeavor, who is just filled with envy and rage and determination and almost outward with his feelings, at least to his family, maybe not to society as a whole, but very outward with these feelings that he has and his drive to continue going forward. While we see Ray, who is an embodiment of someone that bodies up all of her emotions and don't let them out. Really, and that's why she ended up snapping on Shoto at one point, is that she built up all these emotions for so long, and then she burned the right side of Shoto, who she pretty much saw as a spitting image, or the fire side of Endeavor. So seeing that these two come together into a fire quirk that is more powerful endeavors and that feeds off those emotions makes sense, and may be why Toya was such an emotional child growing up. But when he comes to this realization, he goes to Endeavor and begs that over the holiday break he comes and see what he's learned. But this actually has an opposite effect, where Endeavor realizes that he's still been training, he has burns all over his bodies, and gets upset with Toya, but more importantly goes to Ray and starts yelling at Ray, where we have to see a young Shoto protecting his mother, saying stop bullying her, leave her alone. And we see Natsu and Fumi just hiding in a corner, covering their ears, clearly very used to something like this, touching a little bit on the domestic part of the Todoroki family that we probably all knew was there, but we filled in the blanks ourselves, like, thankfully, rather than seeing it happen full force. But they start talking about that moment there, and that Endeavor never went to see Toya in the woods. He never went, and we see Toya on the ground there crying, saying stupid tears, and that those tears actually turn into the blue flames that we know so well today. And it's a little bit of a conversation going back and forth that it would have only fanned his flame. That's why Endeavor didn't go. And then he corrected himself that I didn't know how to talk to the kid. And Ray replying back that I didn't know either, really showing that they did always care about Toya, but they didn't know how to treat him. And by not pretty much going to family counseling, they created a monster in a way by just letting this kid that's fueled off of emotions, and that grows more powerful off of emotions, little do they know, bottle it all up and then ultimately explode. He's up on that woods. He just starts bursting into his flames. His whole body is engulfed in flames, and the entire hillside just starts being burned up. And Endeavor is the one to respond to the scene when he realizes that this is where Toya was and where Toya was asked him. And ultimately, he only ends up finding parts of Toya. I think they only end up finding his jawbone out of everything, and that realizes that this broke Endeavor. That he put some of that blame on himself, but instead of dealing with that in a healthy, emotional way, he bottled that up and almost became more protective and focused on Shoto and his drive to make Shoto the number one hero and the perfect creation, more or less, while Ray became more and more afraid of him, and that is where this boiling point between them reached when she poured the water onto Shoto, because she became so afraid of Endeavor, and that Natsume was a spitting image of Endeavor, that Shoto's right half was Endeavor, that she just couldn't handle the fear that she had inside of her anymore until it broke. So back in the present, we just going back in that Ray tells Endeavor that he isn't the only one responsible for Toya's fate and Toya turning into Dabi, more or less, and that it was on both of them now, and really the Todoroki family as a whole, and that he's not, even though his heart's broken, that he needs to get up and keep moving. And it actually goes to Shoto here, who speaks up, that he tells that before we're going in there, he was talking with the rest of his family members, and that eventually he thought that he was going to have to fight Dabi all alone, and that Endeavor wouldn't be able to. But now seeing this kind of moment here, that he was wrong, and that he extends his hand to Enji, that is now crying, and saying that they need to stop Dabi together. And the chapter ends with one panel seeing that outside of the rooms, Hawks and Bestinist are listening to it and pleased by the results. So, what a chapter. I mean, very often do we get the emotion of protection, of fighting, of adrenaline, kind of the energy to keep going and not losing what's important to you. but very little do we see the raw emotion that we have these last 2 chapters by pretty much Toya and the Endeavor family as a whole, and understanding the psyche. Even though there's so many wrong steps and so many better ways you could have dealt with it, it really wraps up everything of what the Todoroki family is and why they got to this point. Because there's just, up to this point, there were reasons of, like, some of it didn't make sense. Like, really, why Shoto was isolated from the other kids. Well, that makes sense now. Toya was separated out. And why Dabi's flames are blue and so much more powerful, and why the anger that feeds him now makes him so strong. And we even saw, going back to a couple chapters ago, Shoto mentioning that his Dabi's flames were filled with rage, and we know now that's because that's what makes them so strong, and ultimately stronger than Shoto's in the moment. So there's so many cool reveals there, and we also finally get the setup that it is going to be Shoto and Endeavor together, accounting and covering what the Todoroki family should have taken care of so long ago, and more than likely living up for the mistakes that they've made. And that is why I'm so interested and so happy to see that Hawks and Best Jeanist are out there. As much as I love these last couple Todoroki chapters, the keeping up the Todorokis, that whole bit I've loved. I have gotten so much out of the storyline, but I'm ready to move on at this point. I think there's going to be more touches on it. Obviously, there's going to be a whole big moment where they fight Dabi, and there's going to be a lot more reveals and emotional moments and conversations during that. But I think right now we got the whole background, and we have that spark that's going to get Endeavor going again, while also showing the kind of building the bridge between Shoto and Endeavor, that while been getting better through the internship and the working with him at the agency, wasn't quite there yet. This might be finally the moment where we cross over that bridge and maybe see the Todoroki family a little bit more as a whole. I don't think there's ever going to be a healthy family within that group, but I think they're getting closer to a point where they can at least deal with each other or work together, rather than they were in the current state where it was very separated. So with that, we still have the questions of, when is Deku going to wake up? What is Hawks and Best Jeanist going to do? Because we know Hawks is here to help save Endeavor, and maybe seeing Endeavor having this heart-to-heart with the family may not have such a big moment for Hawks, but maybe Hawks being in the background and helping with the next fight. Maybe him revealing his own background and the old hardships that he's gone through. No idea what's going to happen with Hawks over there. I still think Deku's time is probably a little bit farther away. I think we have a couple more chapters before we see Deku wake up, and then that is going to be a whole rush of things. I think that once Deku wakes up, there's going to be a chapter or two of conversations, and then we're going to get going. Because we know Deku isn't someone that can really just give up and stop going forward at all times. And I think we still agree that he's probably in this long coma because of the vestige state. I know these last 10 chapters have happened in a day, so the amount of time that has passed in the world that Deku's been out isn't very long, which is why I think we have a couple more chapters of a couple of days jumping around of maybe Hawks or Endeavor or someone going out and speaking with the public, which still needs to be dealt with. So not quite sure what's going on there, but I still think we have a bit of time before that, because we know that Shigaraki's body is still resting, and that is really the big turning point of when that fight is going to happen. Even though All For One is out there and society as a whole is in a mess, I think we're going to get some answers to that of maybe how that's going to be dealt with. But I still think we need to have those couple of chapters with Deku in the Vestige Realm before any more big world building happens, because I think everyone just wants to know what's happening over there right now. So thank you so much for tuning in this one. I know the chapter recap was a little longer, but it was just so many cool little moments in this chapter that I really want to make sure to focus on all of them, because there were really good reveals and really good emotions that just skipping over them didn't feel right. So I did a lot more time in the chapter today than my thoughts afterwards, because we're wrapping up pretty much a mini arc. So I'm not sure where we're going to go next. There's a lot of very exciting things, so I can't wait for chapter 303 to come out next week. But thank you all so much for listening. I will see you guys next week. Please make sure to subscribe, comment, leave your thoughts down below, or also check out our podcast, which is a Class 1A podcast, available on Spotify, iTunes, Apple, all that kind of stuff. Whatever you want to listen to, it's there, so make sure to check out that. We just did a really cool episode on building our own hero agencies around themes, where I did a super secret detective agency, and then we had a bunch of other ideas as well. So make sure to check that out as well. But thank you so much for listening. I will see you guys later.